Good morning everybody, welcome to IndyCar on the 29th of May. Now you might be wondering what there is left to talk about today after the events of the weekend where the SNP turned the entire country of Scotland a lovely bright yellow colour, with the exception of course of the Northern Islands of Orkney and Shetland, which seem to be stubbornly still Liberal Democrat voting. But anyway, be that as it may, the reason for today's programme is to discuss the latest nonsensical goings-on within the Tory party, and also the coming referendum date, which has been set by the SNP for a second vote on independence. So first of all, to Jeremy Hunt, and the BBC this morning has been making much of Jeremy Hunt's plans. And now, I say plans, Jeremy Hunt's idea is essentially to have a sort of rainbow alliance of everybody in the United Kingdom to get on board with his new Brexit plan, which appears to be a total renegotiation of everything Mrs May has already agreed, which means that it's already, you know, in the land of fairy tales as it is, because it's not going to happen. But let's examine what he's proposing first of all. So Jeremy is saying that if he were the Prime Minister, the first thing he would do would be to start over, basically to start the whole Brexit negotiations over from the beginning. Only this time he says that he would bring along representatives from Scotland, Wales and the DUP. He didn't say Northern Ireland, he just said the DUP, which I always take to be a worrying thing for a Tory to say. But let's leave that for the moment. So he wants a sort of four-country alliance of representatives on his negotiating team. Now, allied to that, he also wants to have representatives of both the so-called hard right of the Tory party, the sort of Brexit at any cost brigade, and the more moderate, shall we say, Ken Clarke types from the Tory party. So in this massive group of negotiators, he plans to export the entire squabbling mass of Great Britain to Brussels, where they are going to try to negotiate with a European Union which is well organised and has already set the bar for the negotiations with an existing negotiated treaty, which they say they have absolutely no intentions of changing. So Jeremy Hunt's going to take most of the United Kingdom on a little holiday to Brussels, where they're all fighting in the back of the car and arguing with each other. And they'll be so busy arguing about Brexit that they won't have time to negotiate. They'll be negotiating with each other. And the whole thing is utter nonsense. I can't believe that any part of Jeremy Hunt's plan could possibly work in any possible reality. So it seems to me a load of nonsense. Add to that this morning the extreme arrogance of the BBC reporters who've been talking to various European politicians this morning about the idea of renegotiating Brexit with a fresh Prime Minister, as though having a fresh Prime Minister altered the facts in any way. Basically, we've still got the same sinking ship, we're just changing the captain, and again the captain is still on a sinking ship and it's still already hit the rocks and it's still going to sink. The only difference this time is who is going to man the lifeboats and abandon ship. So this morning we had the BBC's very arrogant reporters suggesting that Jeremy Hunt, this lovely innocent man, would go to the Brexit sort of negotiation table again in Brussels and ask the European Union very politely to reopen the entire negotiation that Mrs May had done and to start over with him. And he would expect them to just go along with that because, well, that he's put it so nicely and he's asked nicely and said please. And what's going to happen, of course, is he's going to be told that there aren't going to be any more negotiations. That part of the negotiating is done. The exit agreement is not a trade deal anyway. The exit agreement is just simply tying up the loose ends and leaving. It's not even a deal. And to characterise it as Mrs May's deal is just to inflate it into something it's not. The real deal happens after you leave the European Union, and that hasn't even been spoken about. But that would be the other thing he'd want to change, would be the political framework, the declaration which comes after the agreement. And that's non-binding, so there's no way that the European Union would even need to go along with it. And bear in mind that at the point where Brexit happens on the 31st of October, is the very time that the Council of Europe is re-elected and changed. So there won't be the same people negotiating with the UK the day after Brexit. So they wouldn't even have to implement anything that had been agreed. The entire procedure that Jeremy Hunt's proposing to go through is nonsensical. It can't possibly happen, and it can't possibly work. And for a British politician, and supposedly a senior British politician in the cabinet, to come up with such an idiotic plan really just gives the game away. This is just a way to use up time on the way down the road towards the no-deal Brexit that we've always been heading towards. The destination remains the same. On the 31st of October this year, we will leave the European Union regardless of anything else that's going on. No matter how many people try to negotiate, no matter how many prime ministers are elected or chosen or picked, the result remains the same. The Brexit Party had the lion's share of the votes in England over the weekend. And that's because people in England want them to either get on with it or cancel it. And there are only two options in England now: get on with Brexit or cancel it. And that's basically the situation in England right now. But even if Jeremy Hunt was to succeed in reopening negotiations with the European Union, which of course he can't, but even if he did, Scotland isn't going to wear any of it. Scotland has voted decisively to reject all Brexits of any type. So it would only be England which would be Brexiting. The BBC let the cat out of the bag a little bit this morning as well in their morning programme when they interviewed one of their own interviewers, as usual, journalists interviewing another BBC journalist who happens to be standing on the quayside at Pacific Quay in Glasgow with the Finnieston crane in the background. So it made him look as if he was some kind of BBC Scotland correspondent, which he obviously wasn't. But anyway, his view was that it's likely that the SNP are going to hold their independence referendum anyway, regardless of what happens with Brexit. And next year, presumably in 2020, which we'll come back to that date in a minute, in the autumn of next year, the SNP will hold their referendum with or without a Section 30. Now, this is the first time the BBC has actually admitted that Scotland can hold a referendum without so-called permission. Now, this is a big thing for the BBC. They've never admitted before that the SNP can do this. That's the first time they've ever said it. But they said it out loud on live TV this morning that the Scots are likely to hold a referendum next year without anybody's permission whatsoever. And they also admitted that if that referendum were won, which we anticipate it will be, then that would throw the United Kingdom into an existential crisis, because all of the Scots have voted to leave the UK. Now, whether or not England has given permission is irrelevant at this point, because an entire country, Scotland, has voted to leave the Union, to end the Union with England. And England can't say that they haven't decided to do that. And just because they haven't given their permission for this vote to happen, can't make it unhappen. And therefore, the British Prime Minister next year, if this goes ahead, will be in a position of having to deal with Brexit and all the catastrophe that is going to entail, and all the misery that that's going to entail, and have Scotland in the process of leaving the Union without their permission, without a Section 30 order, and without caring if we've got one or not. And I think if it goes that far in 2020, I'd be surprised actually if we take that long to have a referendum. Now that brings me to the second point of the show today, which is Nicola Sturgeon's announcement of the date, an approximate date of the autumn of 2020. She has announced that the legislation which will lay the groundwork and create the framework, that's the legal and political framework in which to have a referendum, will be tabled to Holyrood this week and discussed and debated. Now, considering that the SNP can quite easily muster enough votes to push this plan through very quickly, it puzzles me as to why they've decided to set a date of next year 2020. That seems to be a very long time away, and it also risks a tremendous amount of damage being done to not only the Scottish economy, but to Scottish people's lives in the process. It's been said in the past that many people who might vote for independence are only holding back because they don't see any damage being done to them by Brexit, and therefore it will take some kind of catastrophic damage to their livelihoods, to their mortgage, to their business, to their job, before they will wake up and actually vote for independence in large enough numbers to secure it. I would take issue with that. I think there is a big enough majority at the moment to go for it earlier than that. And my argument has always been from the very beginning that I wouldn't want to risk the livelihoods, the jobs, and the lives of people. I mean, people can starve during periods of mass austerity. British politicians have been saying, and I'm talking about Tory politicians, Labour politicians, I've heard it said by 3 different politicians in the past week, that if we have a no-deal Brexit, it will be a national emergency. Now, think about what those words mean. A national emergency across the whole of the UK could easily mean that normal political discourse can be suspended. It could mean that all devolved parliaments could be suspended for the duration of the emergency, and all control over what happens in all 4 countries could be centralised to London. And that could mean the sidelining of all 3 of the devolved assemblies and parliaments forever. It could last for years, and we would have no way of holding, of holding any kind of meaningful referendums at all, because we wouldn't have politicians who were able to act, and we wouldn't have a debating chamber which was actually in use and what we could get access to. So I'm just watching a leaf blower going past here, so forgive me the noise. That's you can tell it's a live broadcast. I've got a guy with a leaf blower just walking past the car. So the point here is, do we want to risk people's lives? Do we want people starving? Do we want them thrown out their houses? Do we want to lose hundreds of thousands of jobs just in order to ensure that we get a bigger majority than we already have? I think that's a colossal gamble. And I know people will say, well, it would be a gamble to hold the referendum this year. I don't know about that. I think when it's obvious that a no-deal Brexit can no longer be averted, that's the time to have the referendum, not in late 2020. It could well be that we go to a referendum either in the very early new year or even before Christmas, depending on how bad this emergency turns out to be. But if we are daft enough to allow the Tory government to call an emergency, a national emergency, after a no-deal Brexit, then we would reap the rewards of that, which would be suspension of devolution. I cannot see why any British government would continue to allow the Scots, the devolved Scots Parliament, to push for a referendum on independence when they could quite easily shut it down and use Brexit as an excuse. It's the first thing I would do if I wanted to silence the opposition, and I was in the position where I needed Scotland's oil and its wealth and its taxes and its whisky exports and all the rest of it to prop up the ailing economy of the English government. So I've said this all along. I think that the timing of the independence referendum needs to be brought forward if a no-deal Brexit cannot be stopped. It looks like, and I'm only saying it looks like at the moment, and these are my opinions and nobody else's, that the Tories are doing their very best to put on a grand show. It's a great big piece of make-believe, of staged theatre, about changing leaders. They've got 10 candidates. That means they're going to be runoffs. There are going to be multiple votes. It's going to take ages to choose this new leader. By the time we've got the new leader, he's then got to form a government. Then he's got to decide on a policy. Then he's got to decide how he's going to approach Brexit. And so it goes on. And by the time they've done all of that, we know it's going to be too late. Brexit will either be called off because there's such a public outcry about the dangers of it, or it's going to go ahead anyway because the Tories think that they cannot survive if they don't produce a Brexit of some kind. And all the noises coming from the Tory party at the moment, from every single person in the Conservative Party who's thrown their hat in the ring, says that it's all about the survival of the Conservative Party. Now, it's not about Brexit, it's not about the good of the nation, it's about the survival of their party. They're putting their party first. And if they're putting their party first, they don't care whether Brexit damages the entire nation or not, so long as they survive and they keep pocketing their enormous sums of money that they get as politicians in Westminster. So these are the dangers that we face at the moment. Nicola is doing the right thing by putting the legislation in place at the moment, but I believe that that legislation can be pushed through far faster than we're being led to believe. And I also believe that we will be ready to vote on independence before Brexit happens. My guess is that as soon as it's obvious that there's no stopping Brexit, that's when the referendum will be called. And it's the last moment at which I believe the referendum can be called. It won't be able to be stopped once it's been called. It will be organised by Scottish local authorities, as all referendums are. But what the voting system is a different matter altogether. I don't believe that we're going to go with the existing voting system. My feeling is that there will be a new electronic voting system ready in time for the referendum, and it will be hack-proof and foolproof. And it won't be possible for the British state to interfere in the count this time, simply because the Scottish government and the Scottish people will be controlling how that referendum takes place. It will happen along the highest possible standards of democracy. It will be absolutely scrupulously transparent where all the votes are, who's made them. They'll be verifiable. Even in an electronic system, people will be able to verify their votes have been counted. And it will probably be the very first time a completely transparent, verifiable referendum has ever been held in the United Kingdom, and proven to be not tampered with in any way. Let's see what happens. These are my own predictions. Some of them perhaps are a little optimistic, but these are what I hope will happen. But I just wanted to set the scene for you that the way things are looking at the moment is the Tories are preparing to write another soap opera which will keep everybody amused on the television for the next few months until Brexit is no longer able to be stopped. Whether it's hard Brexit, no deal Brexit, or some other form of Brexit, won't matter. There'll be a Brexit of some kind, and either it will be stopped in time or it will not. If it's not going to be stopped in time, then we have to vote on independence immediately, and that vote needs to be called toot sweet before the British state has a chance to shut down devolution, because they definitely will do that. And a state of emergency in any country, in any nation, there is always in the laws of the constitution of that country, whether it's written or not, there will always be some clause somewhere that says, in the case of a national emergency, all procedures may be suspended, martial law may be introduced, local democracy can be shut down, and all of these things may be done in a national emergency. And this has been done by governments time upon number for decades in the past as a way of controlling what happens in a crisis and to neutralise any opposition to what they want to have happening. So be on your guard, but those are my views at the moment on the state of play. We'll see how things pan out over the next few months, but my guess is we're going to be watching another several months of Tory leadership soap opera and pointless backpedaling and treading water until Brexit can't be stopped. The Tories want Brexit. They want it to happen. They don't want to be blamed for it. The BBC is already trying to blame the European Union for it as we speak. They're saying, oh, it's the European Union shutting the door in our face. Nope, we shut the door in our own face ages ago, and the Europeans are quite right. This is an internal British problem, and the British government needs to sort it. If they don't sort it, we will leave the European Union by our own hand, and I'm talking about the UK here, not the Scots, but England will have left the European Union by its own vote and by its own volition. The Scots aren't going anywhere, trust me. We will not be moving out of Europe. And if there's any chance that Brexit is going to happen, we will leave the UK first, because that's the correct way around. There's no point in leaving the UK. That's shutting the door after the horse is bolted. We need to get our retaliation in first. So as soon as Brexit's inevitable, we go. Anyway, I'll leave you with those thoughts today. I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye bye.